Welcome to We Are DB. I am Brenton, joined as always by the lovely Danielle.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks again for joining us this week as we count up the IMDb's best movies of all time and discuss some of the greatest films you mightn't ever have seen. This week, rated as number 24 on the Internet Movie Database by millions of film lovers from around the world is It's a Wonderful Life. Released in 1946, starring James Stewart as the lead, It's a Wonderful Life is a fictional biographical drama set in the fictional town of Bedford Falls, New York. Based on the short story by Philip Van Dorenstern, titled The Greatest Gift, from 1943, It's a Wonderful Life is written for the screen, produced and directed by Frank Capra. I think this movie was nominated for 6 or 7 Oscars, but I don't think it won any.
Interesting.
It barely made any money, like it barely broke even in the box office in the time, but has become a cult classic since.
When was it released?
In 46.
Okay, that's what I thought.
About 2 weeks ago, it was announced that Paul McCartney is writing a musical stage version of It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, interesting.
Which I read that about 2 weeks ago, before watching the movie. This is the first time you and I have seen it.
Yep.
And I thought, oh, that means that this movie must be a musical. And it's not, and not at all. So I don't know how he's going to be able to do that, but if anyone can do it, I'm sure Paul McCartney can.
I was going to say, he's a guy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this movie is rated at number 24 on the list, even though last week it was also number 24. And that's because Avengers Endgame has fallen a few more spots, like overnight. So essentially, the numbers on the list are more of a guide as to where it is on the IMDb rather than an exact, because Avengers Endgame keeps flip-flopping around. We keep chasing Endgame down the list, so it keeps messing with our numbers.
We're going to get to it when we get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
So the numbers no one really cares about the numbers, but
yeah,
it's more of a rough idea as to where this falls on the best list as rated by IMDb users.
I think it's worth mentioning, because you haven't so far, this movie, it starts out in the 20s and spans to about the time that it was released. Like, I'd say it's meant to end in, like, 1946. You know what I mean? Because they go through the war and
I think
all
the
that,
end of this
so.
is the end of the war, so...
Yeah.
So it spans over this guy's life, pretty much, from when 1919, I think, is when it cuts back to, and comes back up to the present.
And I remember thinking, this has got to be one of the oldest movies I've ever seen, because the opening credits were actually filmed pieces of paper being moved away, you know what I mean? Like, I remember thinking, I've never seen that before.
I think a lot of those old Disney animated movies, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Pinocchio, I think they had similar title cards, where they were all like
similar,
hand calligraphy.
or I think one of them, I'm remembering something Disney, maybe it was Sleeping Beauty, had an actual storybook that they were leafing through.
That makes sense, yeah. And that was from the mid-50s, I think that one was from.
Yep.
I actually really quite liked this film. Like, I was surprised that I liked it so much. It's probably the oldest film to actually, like, move me. It had dramatic weight to it. And for these older movies from the 40s or older, it's kind of hard to do that. It really is difficult because the art form was just coming about. And the performances kind of seemed goofier back then. But this one, I don't know, it's just the way that it's filmed and the story content. It was a good drama movie. Surprisingly, actually, because it's got some good comedy and elements in it.
I mean, it is dated a bit in the way people acted, as you were saying, just because back then people really enunciated and they spoke with a harsh tone. Like, a lot of male actors kind of did.
Sometimes, yeah, but there was some goofy scenes in this, though, where they weren't doing that.
Yep.
And I kind of like them because it makes it seem more recent, I guess.
I also liked the way it opened, in that I'm assuming it was God speaking with...
Yeah, this isn't spoilers. This is like the opening thing.
With Joseph and the angel second class, Clarence. And so you see it, and I mean, it's just a still frame of like these lights in a galaxy, and it's just like, where is this going? You know what I mean?
It was like, because they're just having a conversation with each other, and a moon flashes in front of the screen, so you know that it's meant to be space. It was just a very interesting opening scene.
It was, and it wasn't like, it was done in a way where I wasn't like, what the fuck is this?
I just thought, this is strange. All right.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to see where this goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was a very good introduction because they were able to show retrospectively the main character's life in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought that was quite clever.
Yeah, so it's like, well, you're going to need this information, so we'll show it to you now, and then they show it. It's expositional.
So basically their conversation covers the fact that this guy, George Bailey, is about to kill himself, and let's go back and see what led up to this moment. So they go back 30 years or so just to see where it comes up to this, and that all happens in the first few minutes. They explain that, and it's a good way to set up a biographical drama.
Yeah. And so the movie is them going through all of the pivotal events in his life and going through pretty much the entirety of his life from when he was a young kid to when, he was a teenager and what events affected his life and why it turned out the way it did. And it's interesting because the whole point is to show all of the things he's done in his life that have touched and affected other people, because later on in life, those are displayed to him because he doesn't realize how important he's been in other people's lives. But I like the way that it was done in such a way that it just looks like life, but then, you go back and you see, oh, that was actually really important. You know, like everything that's happened was actually really important.
I just wanted to say real quick, doing this podcast and going back and watching these classic movies that I've never seen before, there's so many of these moments where it's like, oh, that's what that's from. That's what that reference is for pop culture since then. You know what I mean? There's so many things that make reference to these old movies. And you see that quite a lot when we go back like this. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, there's an episode of Futurama where Bender, the robot, is flying through space. And he basically talks to God. And God is a bunch of constellations that flash when he talks. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what God is depicted as here. It's just like a constellation that sort of flashes, and I'm guessing that that's what that's a reference to. Yeah,
well, and same for me. My family's nuts about National Lampoons. We watch Christmas Vacation every Christmas. And there's a line in there, it's the very last line in this movie, and it's George's little daughter saying, "Teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings." And I've heard that 100 times, and I didn't know where it was from. It was from this movie. Right? Yeah. So it's like, it's interesting.
I think that's actually interesting because Frank Capra, the director and producer of this, his grandson, Frank Capra III, was actually an assistant director on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Huh.
They're all three of them. There's like a whole family of the Capra film family, basically.
That's funny. That's interesting.
And there's also the scene that I remember from Bruce Almighty where he says, you want the moon? I'll lasso the moon and pull it down to you.
Yeah, I was thinking of that one too.
Yeah, and the joke in Bruce Almighty is that he actually does pull down the moon and it fucks up the tides on the other side of the world and people are like flooded out and stuff. It's just kind of just playing on that joke. But there's a few things in this, or even The Simpsons makes reference a couple of times. So I quite liked it. I'm glad that there was like a few things in there. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. I like these moments where I understand pop culture now.
Yeah, well, like how interesting, because it's like, it comes from somewhere, but where in the hell does it come from? This is where it comes from. Yeah. Who'da thunk it? Not me. I enjoy them for that reason too, and I enjoy them because these movies are done in a different way to films now. They're a lot more expositional, so they're a lot more, kind of handing it to you on a silver platter, which I don't mind because I don't think it's that bad
in this one.
No, it was the style back then, so it was done differently. If you did it now, I don't think people would appreciate it this as much, and I don't think it would be done as well. And it just, it makes it a little bit more relaxing to watch because you're not worried that you're going to miss anything. You know what I mean? You can sit back. Even though this is a drama, this isn't a drama where you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. You know what I mean?
I think there's maybe 2 or 3 scenes where you really get involved like that, and the rest of it's pretty lighthearted.
I was going to say, but even in those scenes, you're not terrified or sweating or so emotionally aroused. It's comfortable to watch.
I think the subject matter is the biggest pull of this movie more than anything. More than the shots or anything like that, or really the acting. The acting is fine. It's pretty good. But it's definitely the subject matter and this interesting concept. I love high concept movies. Mm-hmm.
I'd say this one's medium concept. I wouldn't say this one's high concept.
I think it is, but you only see the high concept come into effect an hour and 40 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Because I had read about this movie and I'd heard about the concept, and I'm like, okay, so that's what I was expecting going into the movie. And I'm like, did I get it confused with like Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol or something? Well, I'm confused as to, oh, there it is, finally. So I think it is high concept, but it takes forever to get there, which we'll get to in spoilers.
However, even in getting there, it's still very compelling.
Yes.
It wasn't boring. You know what I mean?
It's good setup.
Like, yeah, and you're just like, you're genuinely interested in the plot and what's happening right up until it gets to that point, and then you're like, oh, geez, well, oh, geez, Rick. You're just like, oh, man, like, what's gonna happen here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say is the oldest movie you've ever seen?
I have no idea. Probably one of those Disney movies, or maybe...
You've seen Gone with the Wind, haven't you?
Yes.
That was from 39.
Fuck, that's a long movie. That is a
it's like 4 hours.
long-ass movie, and you don't even really need the second half. That's my opinion. It's a 4-hour-long movie, Nate.
We're going to be getting into some really old, early 30s silent films in the next couple of months.
We'll see how I fare.
I'm warning you now, just in case. There's a few Charlie Chaplin ones in a row. We were talking about how the first half is actually quite compelling, and I think it's a good setup because I think it does a great job at painting a picture as to who this guy is and what his life is like and what kind of struggles he's been through, I guess.
You see all of his motivations.
Yeah, he's kind of a likable character in that because he's down to earth.
And you really understand him as a character. Like, they've done a very good job in, how does he feel? What does he want out of life? How come he hasn't got there? And everything like that. It's impressive how well they've displayed that, I think.
Yeah, definitely the first hour or so, it's fun, it's easy to follow, it's harmless, it's a nice story, and then towards the end, it packs a punch, I think. And I quite like that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that George Bailey in this movie is the exact same age as my great-grandmother, who I knew quite well when I was a kid. And it's just interesting to me on a personal note, thinking about my family during this time.
Yeah.
So Zuzu, his daughter, would have been my grandmother.
That's interesting.
I don't know, just it makes the movie seem a lot older than what it is, because this feels like an old movie, but it doesn't feel like a really old, sluggish, hard-to-watch movie.
I feel that way with my Nana a lot, actually, because she was born in 1950. So she was growing up in a teenager through the 60s when a lot of, like, really important historical shit went down,
Yeah, so if you watch movies that are based in the 60s and 70s, you have to think in your eyes of your teenage Nana, basically.
Yeah, it's just weird to me because I'm like, holy crap, like, you'd remember that. You'd remember that really, really well. You know what I mean? So I can go talk to her. Like, I often ask her about, like, the Beatles and stuff because she loved the Beatles, hey. She talks about, she remembers when JFK died and how sad she was and just all sorts of stuff like that.
It puts it in more of a personal perspective, yeah.
Yeah. It brings it closer to home for me to think, like, to me it seems so far removed, but to her it was like, yeah, I was a teenager. Yeah. That's weird.
I think it, like, visually puts memories into, like, perspective.
Yes.
Because my great-grandmother, she lived until she was 96. Mm-hmm. So, like, you could have a conversation with her, and she lived through both world wars.
Yeah, that's bizarre to me.
She was, like, working class in the Great Depression. Like, that's so weird that someone from the 30s who was old enough to be having kids in the 30s is, like, around talking in the 21st century.
Yeah.
It puts it in a more of a personal perspective, and I kind of I kind of like it when I can relate to something like that. Like, I did the same thing with Rain Man, where I'm like, everyone's the same age as someone I know, you know what I mean? So I get more of a perspective on these people's lives, more so than when I was a kid, and I'm like, I don't know what an age is. What is a year?
Yeah.
So we're going to go into spoilers now.
Yep.
And I think that's not a bad transition into some of the discussions on the Great Depression in this, because that's kind of a big drive for him getting down towards the end of this movie and feeling down on himself, is because he's struggling so hard through the Depression. And I don't really know that much about the Depression, and you were trying to explain some things. I still don't understand some of the things around that, which in 1946, you didn't have to explain that in a film, because all those people would have been alive during the Depression and they knew what happened. That's
just it. It's like giving reference to 9/11 to somebody who doesn't know what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose, but that's that's like 18 years ago. I'm thinking about the global financial crisis that was like 10 years ago to us.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, on this scale, it's like, let's say we're 50 years in the future, and you just give nonchalant reference to 9/11. People might... I mean, now it might be different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, people might not understand what exactly happened, but it was like, for a generation, everybody knows what it was. You know what I mean?
So can you explain to me, I still don't understand, the bank runs out of money in this.
Yeah, so what happened, and I still don't quite remember why the market crashed in the first place, but there was a huge stock market crash. So everything went down to a lot less than it was worth. And so the banks lost a lot of money, because the way banks work, right, is you put your money in the bank takes your money, invests it, makes more money, and then because you allowed them to borrow your money, that's how you get interest, right?
Yes.
So at any given time, really, a bank actually doesn't have all of the cash money to cover the amounts that are in its accounts.
Yeah, especially not these days. Everything's digital.
Yeah. So what happened was, there was the stock market crash. All of the money that the bank invested in stocks was lost because the values went way down. And because they didn't have the money to pay out their people, the banks literally ran out of money. And there's a scene in this movie where it says that has all the hallmarks of a run. What a run on a bank is when everybody who holds an account in that bank goes to the bank and wants to get their money out at the same time. On a given day, when there's not a stock market crash, that wouldn't be a good thing. So you can imagine how it would have gone. And the reason people were so panicked is because they knew that the banks were running out of money. So that was the start of the Depression.
Yeah, but if you say that you have money in the bank, and you have a statement saying this is how much money theoretically is in the bank because it's not physically there.
Yeah.
Whether or not the bank has it or not, do you not still have that statement saying you, the bank, owe me money? Maybe
it was an issue of it being the 30s. They didn't...
Does that make sense, though?
Yeah. Well, and the thing with the Depression, too, is that the value of that money went down. Like, you talk about...
Right, yeah.
What caused... Essentially, a contributing factor to the Second World War was also the Great Depression, because it affected worldwide. In Germany, people could have hundreds of Deutschmarks, and they were worth more as kindling for their stoves than they were as money.
During the war?
Before the war.
Oh, okay.
Before the Second World War. It took a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks to buy a loaf of bread because a mark became so worthless because of the market value. So money's a weird thing. It's hard to understand. But essentially, why this was an important event in this movie was because you see George continually not being able to do the things he wants to do. So it starts out with, he can't go away to college. So he's stayed home and he's worked because his family is poorer. His dad runs basically a credit union. It's like a bank, and it's a building and loan agency where people, they can keep their money, and the money goes towards helping people build houses at a lower interest rate so they can own their homes faster.
I'm trying to think about that conversation about the college, because that was when the maid was walking around and he's sitting at the table.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the conversation was about.
Something happened. Oh, that's what it was. He was going to go off to college, but his dad had a stroke, so he couldn't go off to college and get out of Bedford Falls.
That's right, yeah.
Right? And then his dad died, and the board of directors of that company, the building and loan, appointed him as head director or whatever, so he couldn't leave. So then later on...
Were they not going to appoint Mr. Potter? And then George said, not unless I'm here.
I was going to say, like hell, because this old bastard was the richest, meanest man in town. Think of Scrooge McDuck. You know what I mean?
Scrooge McDuck. You know Scrooge McDuck is actually based on a character, Scrooge.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying.
You say that like that's the reference.
So there's a lot of factors that play into why George can't go off. He wanted to go see the world and become educated, and I think he wanted to be either an architect or an engineer. He talks about building skyscrapers and bridges and things. And again, then the depression happens and the business almost goes under. And the contributing factor that really, really pushes him to want to jump off the bridge is that his uncle, who he works with, loses $8,000. And how much was that worth at the time, Brenton? The equivalent of...
It was about $144,000 US today.
Which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And this is at a time, too, when people didn't have a lot of money, right?
Yeah. Can you imagine actually seeing 144 grand just in cash, just sitting there?
No.
Oh, I lost it. Where's it gone?
Yeah, exactly. So he was, he's had all of these things in his life where he hasn't been able to do what he wants to do. But he's worked through it, and now he's got, a lot of little kids, and his business has always, it's never been stable.
Well, that business, I was going to ask.
Yep.
He was basically selling homes for the prices that it costs and not profit? Is that basically what he was doing?
Yeah, he was probably making enough just to live. To live and to pay his employees. The whole purpose that his dad who started it and that he was doing it for was so that people could
own their own houses.
Live, yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't really a thing, especially during the Depression. People didn't own their own houses.
He was doing it for the philanthropy of it, not for the business side of it. He even says, I'm not a businessman. My dad wasn't a businessman. We're not in it for the business. You know what I mean?
Because there's an employee of Potter. He comes up to him and he's like, these houses are worth twice as much as what they're being sold for. Mm-hmm. And they're saying it in such a negative way, like, oh, what a missed opportunity kind of thing. Yeah. But then these people wouldn't be able to own their own houses.
Yeah. And so he's doing it so that the rich don't get richer, Yeah.
And I also looked up when Potter offers Bailey a job to try and buy him out, basically. Mm-hmm. And he says $20,000 a year, which is more than what I make right now in modern times, for 3 years at least as a minimum contract. $20,000 in 1937 is $363,000 US.
$363,000. That is insane.
That's a lot of money. During the Depression, when you've got 4 kids... No, he didn't have kids. That was just before he did the cut towards the kids. Mm-hmm. But he's looking to have kids.
Because he's going to do that, and he's literally on his way to the train station to go on his honeymoon when the run on the bank happens and he can't leave.
Yeah.
So he never even gets to travel. They were going to go around for months and months, and then the Depression happened.
Which you could possibly do for $2,000. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. It's just... This is really interesting, and I want to know your opinion and your perspective, because you didn't know a lot of the historical stuff, so you actually had to stop and you're like, what's going on? And I had to
explain
the
Depression,
it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've never really been in that position before where you're like, I don't know what's going on.
It explains a lot to do with finances, which is the main cause of drive for depression, I would say, is people not being able to do things with money or being able to feed themselves or looking after their family.
You're saying clinical psychological depression?
Yes.
Okay. We're also talking about financial depression. So sorry for being confused.
Would you agree with that? It's a big driver in personal mental health depression.
Finances, yes, absolutely.
So that's why there's such a big emphasis on that throughout the whole movie. It's a running theme, which is understandable, but I don't understand that much about finances. So yeah, I can understand why I was a bit lost there.
Yeah.
I think this movie really kicks off or gets more interesting for me when he's on the bridge and he's about to kill himself. He wants to jump off the bridge into icy waters and kill himself because he's just gone through a series of events where it's just like, fuck. And then he gets kicked while he's down. He crashes his car. He gets punched in the face after losing this $8,000. So I think it paints a picture of, you can absolutely understand why this character is wanting to kill himself.
110%.
Because he's also insured for $15,000.
There's literally a line that says, I'm worth more dead than alive.
Yes. So you can absolutely see the character's motivations behind his actions, and that makes him feel more real. Otherwise, if it wasn't fleshed out like that, you would kind of think that that act was shallow or hollow or something, and you wouldn't feel for the character the way that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like the setup to that. And then that point onwards, you've got Clarence. Is it Clarence?
I was going to say, that's when Clarence makes his first appearance, and we're like, okay, now we're getting back to what we were seeing in the beginning of the movie. This is when the story, as it was introduced, actually starts.
It takes quite a while. It feels like a long movie. It feels like a really long movie, but I think it's just like a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, it is. I think we took a couple breaks.
Maybe.
But you're like, we've been sitting here for like 4 hours, and this is like an hour and 50-minute movie. What the heck? Yeah.
So from that point forward, they're going through the town and seeing what the town and the people would be like if he had never been born. And I think that's where the high concept comes in, and I always find those scenes very interesting. It reminded me a lot of Back to the Future 2. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Where he goes back in time to an alternate reality, an alternate 1985, where Biff is rich.
What is the thing there?
Well, they were in the year 2015, and then old Biff went back to 1955, gave himself the almanac so that he could make lots of money. And then when Marty goes back to 1985, it's an alternate reality in which Biff is this big billionaire.
Yeah.
Which was actually modeled on Donald Trump, by the way, if you go back and watch that movie.
Yeah.
He's a villainous billionaire. Yeah.
He even looks like
in
him.
85, yeah. He's got the hairstyle as well. But there's a scene of that where he's running through the town and being like, what is this? This isn't the town that I know. It's very similar to the scene in this. He even goes back to his actual house, and it's someone else is living there. It's locked up. There's casinos everywhere. There's these porno theaters. He sees some people that he knew in his reality, and they don't recognize him in the same way. And it's a very similar scene. I kind of really, I'm drawn to those scenes, even if they're not done well, because I think it's just fascinating to see even the producers like take on these alternate realities and how people react.
Well, and for George, it takes him so long to grasp the fact that this is real. He's like, come on,
which
like,
is fair
you know
enough.
me. You know what I mean? And they're like, I don't know, you have never seen you before in my life. And it takes him until his wife doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And isn't it interesting, too, how this is the alternate reality simply where he had not been born, and it's affected so much, right? So it's like his wife is really homely looking. Like, she's a very stunning, beautiful woman. And it's like, why would she not embrace that if she hadn't met him? You know what I mean?
So that means that he had that effect on her, making her feel more beautiful and wanting her to express herself that way more. Yeah, because she's definitely dressed more like an older woman, an older librarian type, you know? And
she's got, like, the little, like, wire glasses and the little hat and not nice shoes and just looking shabby and frumpy and stuff. And it's like, she's very stunning in every other scene, so... And his mom doesn't know who he is, and brother died because he saved him from drowning when he was like 9 or something. So there's so many things that are different, but it's ultimately when his wife doesn't know who he is, when he's like, take me back.
That's the turning point.
I want to take me back. I want to live, you know.
And it makes him appreciate everything, which is an interesting point, because even because he lost the $8,000, they said, you're going to jail.
Yeah.
And he's like, fantastic. As long as I'm alive, as long as I have my family, they're still alive. The town is the way that I helped create it this way. As I don't care if I go to jail. You know what I mean? Like, he's so much more appreciative.
Yeah, because he's got the feds. I think it's the equivalent of the IRS, the tax bureau, that's sitting there, and they're like, we've got a warrant for your arrest. He's like, that's amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I love scenes like that in silly movies, because I think even there's another one that's like that where, you know, they gave each other sideways looks because it's like, is this guy nuts? Like, why would you be so excited to be going in?
I like how they tied in these realities, because he thinks that he's still in the alternate reality, and then he goes back to the bridge to find the angel again, and then all of a sudden the police officer comes to find him, and
it's like, George!
He recognizes him. Yeah. So it seamlessly went back to this reality that he knows, as if it was all a dream, was all in his head, and that's how Clarence the Angel was able to mess with him. Like, how... At what point did it stop becoming real? Was it all real, or was it all in his head? Was it a vision?
Yeah.
Like, it all had the same outcome.
Yeah.
I thought it was a clever way to splice it back into that reality.
I also liked the nice touch of Clarence periodically looking up at the sky and having conversations with people we couldn't hear.
Yeah.
You know? Like, what was that one? He's like, I didn't have anything to drink, or something, you know what I mean? Like, when they're at the bar.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I didn't mind Clarence. It was funny.
Yeah.
He was just very nonchalant, yeah.
Yeah. Little old man.
Why do you think that this movie is at number 24 on the list? Do you think it deserves it?
Yeah, because of all of those effects, like, it kind of ticks all the boxes, you know?
Yeah.
It's an easy watch, but it's high concept, and it mixes humor with a touching story. And it was actually quite impressive. It would have had to have a bit of a higher budget to change sets the way that they did. Because you go from a quite, like, small town vibe to a lot of, like, Vegas-style flashing lights, what it would have looked like at the time. And it's just like, you would have had to dress it up a lot, you know what I mean? Like, that would have taken a fair bit of money. So I think to the Academy at the time, like, they would have appreciated that.
Or even their house. Because you see the house in shambles, and then you also see it when they've done it up and renovated it. Mm-hmm. So they would have had to been 2 sets as well.
Yeah. So there's a fair bit of production value that went into this.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of all those factors. The acting was quite good for the time.
I really like the interactions between George and his wife. I think that those are the best acting pieces.
Yeah. I like how you see their love story. You see it progress in, like, snapshots, but even in that, it's done really well.
Yeah.
You know?
I surprisingly enjoyed it more than what I thought I would. I really quite liked it. It's a good story because in the end, he appreciates life. And I think that's the big message that people can take away from this is the little things in life could be helping other people or you. It's just, I think it's a good story.
And it wasn't hard to follow. That's why I appreciated it. There's certain ones I like having a thinker, but this one was a really good balance of a comfortable, easy watch and a good concept. Like, it hit those notes really well.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, wasn't there 2 police characters in this called Bert and Ernie?
No, one was the cab driver.
Oh, the cab driver, okay.
Yeah.
I thought, is that a coincidence with the Sesame Street characters? It has to be, right?
I was gonna say, I picked up on it first and I'm just like, ha ha.
Because this is long before Sesame Street. Sesame Street, started in the 60s?
It must just be a coincidence.
Must just be a coincidence, because it's not like they were, like, big characters or memorable or anything. It was just a mention to Bert and Ernie, and I thought it was funny.
Yeah, it was.
I would really like to see what Paul McCartney's able to do with this. I don't really know what you could do.
Yeah, I could see him doing something with it. I'd be curious to see it. I think you could incorporate musicality into it quite well, actually. And also, it would translate into a stage play quite well.
I think you're right, yeah.
It's really only set over, like, 1 to 3-ish sets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So that's why it would. I'm looking forward to a chance to see that and see what I think of it.
It'll probably be a few years away, because I think he's just announced that he's writing it.
I quite liked it as well. It was a good one.
We have been Danielle and Brenton this week. Thanks again for joining us. Feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, check us out on all the socials, and comment on SoundCloud. And until next week, thanks for listening. I'm warning you now, just in case. There's a few Charlie Chaplin ones in a row.
Mm.
I say Chapman all the time. It's Chaplin.
Yes.
Chapman.
Not the ice cream.
Isn't Chapman ice cream?
Chapman's ice cream.
Ice cream? I can't even say that one right.
Brendan's had a stroke. He can't talk anymore.
Did you say Brennan's?
No, I said Brenton. Brenton's had a stroke.
Puddins?